king, one leader of the Islamic world, and this is what we see here. And that is the dream today. Al-Qaeda wants a caliphate from Indonesia in the Far East, right through Asia, right through Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, all the way up to Spain. Even Spain is included in the caliphate. The reason being that whenever any territory has been ruled by Muslims, it must always be Muslim. Spain was ruled by Muslims for about 700 years. And so, the feeling is that Spain belongs to the Ummah, the community of Islam. And of course, Israel, which is not Islamic, it's a Jewish nation, in their minds belongs to Islam, because it was Islamic right up until 1917, for over 1,000 years. So therefore, it must become Islamic again. So this is the, part of the outrage against Israel. And, the desire ultimately is that the whole world must also be Islamic. Here's another map as well showing the extent of Islam. This is about 750. If the French had not defeated the Muslims at the Battle of Tours in 732, the whole of Europe might have fallen to Islam, which means the United States would never have existed. And we would all be living in Europe, and we'd still be Muslims, would have been for over 1,000 years. So it's amazing how sometimes one battle can make a very big difference. Here again is another map showing this expansion of Islam. There's a lot of these maps available. That one too. Now here's the Crusades. I mentioned that Islam and the West have clashed on a number of occasions. And the Crusades was one of those occasions. The first time was that battle in France in the 8th century. And then in 1095, the Pope called for a crusade against the forces of Islam. The Muslims had taken control of the Holy Land, and they were giving Catholic pilgrims trouble when they went there. So he called for a crusade against Islam. And for over 200 years, Europeans sent troops to the Middle East to fight the forces of Islam. And those Europeans were extremely cruel towards the Muslims and towards the Jews, and towards each other for that matter. And consequently, it's still remembered today. The word crusade is a highly emotive word in the Middle East. Shortly after September the 11th, President Bush called for a crusade against Islamic terrorism, and it was a very big mistake because it's been used against the US repeatedly since then. The word crusade reminds them of the Crusades from 1095 right up until around 1300, 200 years. During that time in the 1100s, for less than 100 years, the Kingdom of Jerusalem existed, which ruled the area which is basically today what we call Israel. And it was finally defeated. Saladin defeated it and drove the Crusaders out. But, the Islamic forces today are encouraged by that, because they feel that just as the Kingdom of Jerusalem was a Western colony in that area, so the Jewish nation of Israel today is similarly a Western colony. And just as they got rid of the Kingdom of Jerusalem in the 1100s, so they will get rid of Israel. So, there will never be peace as long as Israel exists. And the Bible shows that Israel, or Judah in Bible prophecy, will exist right up until Christ's return. So we're going to have never-ending conflict in this part of the world right up until that particular time. Now here in the 13, 14, 1500s is the growth of the Ottoman Empire that was centered on Turkey. Now this empire, again, is not ancient history. The Ottoman Empire existed until 1922, so fairly recently. And it ruled Jerusalem for 400 years, from 1517 to 1917. The Ottoman Empire, as you can see, was very big. It took control of Southeast Europe. And in fact, twice in the 1500s and again in the 1600s, it tried to take the city of Vienna, right at the heart of Catholic Europe, and twice failed. But the Ottoman Empire was a major threat to Europe. And here you see this force, this Islamic force that was trying to, conquer the whole of Europe. So this is the second attempt then conquest of Europe by Islamic forces. But this is not the second time that Islam and Christianity clashed. That has been going on throughout history, and again, we're seeing the same thing today, Islam and the Western forces clashing. I might just mention here, by the way, the West as a term was first applied to the Western Roman Empire. That during the time of Constantine in the 4th century, he established another capital in the east of Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, right up here. So the Roman Empire, had two halves. The west was this part, which was centered on Rome, and then the east was ruled from Constantinople. So the west originally basically meant Catholic Europe. Today the west means the democratic countries in the west. But I think it's kind of interesting that again we're seeing the papacy come to the fore in trying to defend the Western world from Islam, with the Pope's comments last month that seemed to be the first shots in this clash between the two. Anyway, let's carry on, look at these. Here's the decline of the Ottoman Empire. As the Ottoman Empire fell apart, different countries got their independence over the various centuries. The Balkans, of course, remains a mess to this day because you have 3 different religions operating in this area. And there is amazing conflict. There is Islam. The Albanians are Islamic. The people of Kosovo are Muslims. Bosnia. But then you've also got the Orthodox religion in Serbia. And you have the Catholic religion in Croatia. And these 3 just don't get along with each other. So periodically you see these different conflicts. World War I began because of this, with a conflict that started in the city of Sarajevo in 1914. And as the Economist news magazine mentioned a few years ago, when there was more fighting in the Balkans, it said a century which began in Sarajevo is ending in Sarajevo. In other words, this conflict just won't go away. And, we can expect that to flare up again at some point. But, this struggle between Islam and the 2 different factions of Christendom has gone on throughout history. Now, after the Ottoman Empire, you had the rise of the English-speaking nations with a variant of Christendom, with Protestantism. And so with the Protestant religion came more freedom. There wasn't really any freedom when Rome dominated Europe, but freedom of religion did come with the Protestant religion. It was slow and gradual. And this map here shows the British Empire in red, the multitude of nations of Bible prophecy. And in the blue part, of course, is the United States, which is the great single nation. And these 2 nations dominated the world right up until World War II. Towards the end of that period, the British dominated the Middle East. Everything colored red there is the British Empire right up until World War II. So in the lifetimes of some people here, these countries were under British control, and there was relative peace in the area while it was under British control. British control or British dominance of the Middle East ended 50 years ago this month, as it happens, in 1956. I'll come to that a little bit later. But after the British period of the Middle East, you had the independence of all the various countries. Today you have many countries in the Middle East, which of course complicates everything. You have 22 Arab nations, for example. Plus you have other countries like Iran, which is not Arab, Sudan, which is not Arab, Afghanistan and others. And of course you have other countries that have become independent fairly recently. You can see at the top Turkmenistan, which is a new one. Let's have a look at that as well. Here's another map of the Middle East today with all the many different nations, the complexities of this world at this time, this region. Now look at this. This is the